Alright folks, today I'm going to present to you another case of dark environmental storytelling in the Walking Dead universe. I assume most of you are familiar with this series, but if not, environmental storytelling is something that has been used in The Walking Dead since its inception. A technique where a series of objects or bodies will be laid out in a way that conveys a story to the viewer without explicitly stating what that story is. Today I'm going to be taking a closer look at the scene left behind at Wiltshire Estates in The Walking Dead Season 2, Episode 6. Not to be confused with Shire Wilt Estate scene in Season 5, Episode 9, which are both references to Wiltshire from the comics. Yeah, I don't know why they felt the need to do it twice either. I'm going to structure this video by taking you through the story as it was first presented to us, before going back and attempting to piece together the evidence to figure out what happened here. These videos aren't meant to convince you I'm right, just to start a conversation around a small topic I've always found interesting. We're probably never going to get answers to most of these questions anyway, so it's all just for fun in the end. If you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comments down below, and drop a sub to see more videos like this. As most of us know, Season 2 opens with the disappearance of Sophia Peltier in the Georgian wilderness, leading our survivors on a search mission for the next 6 episodes in an attempt to bring her home safe. During the episode, Secrets, we're given an unlikely duo as Shane spends the afternoon training Andrea to hone in her shooting skills. Wanting to check out a lead on Sophia's whereabouts, the two find themselves in a residential neighborhood known as Wiltshire Estates. A relatively new community developed barely 10 years before the outbreak that would be the perfect place for a 12-year-old to hide in safety. When arriving, the two are greeted by empty streets. Well, sort of empty. Nearly every garbage can seen outside the homes are overfilled with trash, as if there was an attempt by the community survivors to maintain the estate for some time. But now, the roads lie still as abandoned vehicles rot across the neighborhood. It's clear whatever sense of community was building here did not last long, but the question of what happened remains. Searching the first house, the two would discover furniture piled up as if it were supposed to barricade the door shut, but clearly it had been moved since that time. Pushing a little deeper, the mystery thickens as Andrea notices the hallways to the rest of the home had been completely walled off, the only access to the other side being a distinctly human-shaped hole left behind in the drywall, surrounded by what appears to be dried blood from whoever passed through. It looks like somebody was trying to get away from something, ripping their way through the wall and dismantling the barricade from the inside. But if somebody could get out, surely somebody like Sophia could get in. So cautiously, the two cross through the hole and descend deeper. Furniture blocks the hallway once again on the other side, akin to somebody frantically grabbing whatever they could to create a choke point. What from? Well, the dead, of course. On the floor lie bodies of what appeared to have once been walkers unceremoniously piled onto each other. To me, this is beginning to paint the picture of a classic zombie horde invasion. But the bodies intentionally piled up tells me whoever this individual was not only was skilled in combat and survival, but was maybe attempting to take their home back from the dead. But where were they coming from if the house's main entrance was walled off? Well, pushing through the barricades, Shane and Andrea would arrive in the garage, where the door lies half propped open, as if it were made as the only way in or out intentionally. What's interesting, however, the entire garage seems to have had damage from some sort of fire, as bodies lie charred on the floor, rubble scatters the ground, and shelves appear melted down in the back. I initially thought these were simply walkers who came in through the door and attacked before getting set ablaze, but looking at this particular body, they appear to have been lying on some sort of mattress before their death, unlike the other bodies seen around, leading me to believe they may have been the survivalist's significant other, or at the very least, friend that passed in their bed within the house that was dragged down, mattress and all, in what almost looks to be an attempted cleansing, as we can see gas canisters by their feet, implying this was purposely set by the house owner. Clearly, Sophia was never there. But that didn't mean they were alone, as within minutes of breaking into the house, the entire neighborhood would be crawling with the dead, seemingly appearing from thin air. But if I were to guess, they were more than likely dormant in the other homes, only wandering out when hearing the two bust in the door. This may be a bit of a stretch, but the Frank Darabont era of walkers seem to have echoes of who they once were somewhere deep inside, as we see instances like Jenny in episode 1 returning to the place she died. Maybe the idea was this neighborhood fell to a horde, and the residents who turned continued roaming their homes in death, but that is just a theory. Fighting their way to the car, Andrea would use what she had been taught by Shane to dial in her shooting skills, landing headshots on the moving targets she struggled to hit in the past. The two would get out of Wiltshire unscathed, but judging by what looks to be an attempt to flee from the house and vehicles left behind in the middle of the streets, it's possible others may have gone away as well. Now, this is a short but rather interesting scene that doesn't give us a lot of information, but just enough to start theorizing. I'm now going to attempt to piece together a story, but again, I am just theorizing what could have happened here based on what I've noticed. So it's entirely possible I could misinterpret or miss some evidence entirely. But like always, this is where you guys come in. I'd love to hear what you believe happened here in the comments down below. While the world was falling around them, the residents of Wiltshire Estates would either choose to flee to the cities in fear, or do their best to remain calm and stay put, believing it would only be a matter of time before the authorities came to clean things up. But unlike what we've seen with Chilton High or the Clark's neighborhood in Fear, the military did not occupy this neighborhood as a safe zone in the initial days after Monument Day, leaving the residents to unknowingly fend for themselves. Based off the amounts of trash in the bins, the survivors did their best to keep things tidy and civilized within their quiet neighborhood over at least a couple weeks for when they thought help was arriving, encountering minimal walkers in this time. But as the military began dropping napalm on the major metropolitan cities attempting to contain the dead, the reality that they were alone would hit, leaving the scared civilians to find a way to survive on their own. We only ever see the inside of one of these houses during this scene, but it's clear the owner was a survivalist and had been locking it down, sealing the entrances to the house behind walls to avoid extra areas for the dead to enter in case that time came, strategically leaving the garage door as the only way in or out. Judging by the bodies left behind after the fact, this individual may have had some sort of combat training, leaving them at an advantage compared to their neighbors and choosing to remain distant from them because of this. Unfortunately, the day would come where Wiltshire's luck with the dead would run out, just as our survivalists predicted, as a passing herd would stumble through their streets. Being so early on in the timeline, most wouldn't know how to defend themselves from the walkers properly, retreating to their homes to inevitably be swarmed when the dead broke in, leaving them to remain wandering in purgatory until some other unfortunate soul stumbled into their neighborhood and drew their attention. Some would attempt to flee in their vehicles, and it's quite possible a few were successful, but looking at some of the trucks left abandoned in the middle of the street, not all were that fortunate. Everybody was blindsided, but as we know, someone was preparing for an event like this to happen right down the street. Now, what happened inside the house is by far the biggest head scratcher here. Two piles of bodies are seen inside. One burnt with gasoline, the other presumably awaiting the same fate in another room. I can think of two plausible scenarios that could maybe explain what happened here, but they're both gonna have some issues. As mentioned before, perhaps this was some sort of cleansing, with our survivalists attempting to clear the herd by using the garage door to grab and put the walkers down one by one before dragging them back inside to avoid getting overrun, intending to burn them group by group, attempting to kill the infection's spread, as well as to keep the flames low as not to burn the entire house down, while putting their souls to rest in the process. With the first of which containing somebody close to the survivor who had passed earlier, possibly from a bite during the initial attack. But when the fire got out of hand, they would be forced to open the garage door to let the smoke out at the risk of burning the entire house down, drawing the dead on the outside right into the house, causing the survivor to retreat deeper inside and barricade the hallways. Although I will say this seems like a pretty silly mistake for somebody who seems to be this prepared to make. Alternatively, maybe this was intentional. With the survivor losing their loved one in the house, they understood staying would not be an option, intending to lure the rest of the dead into the garage with the flames in hopes of bringing them all down. The only thing that would go against this interpretation would be the second pile of bodies on the other side of the barricade, unless they were meant to be burned as well until a survivor ran out of time or something. I'm sure there are 1,000 theories you could come up with as to what happened inside these walls. But any way we approach this ordeal, I believe it ends the same way. Our survivor is trapped inside the house as the dead push up against the barricade. Now, we know this individual had smashed through the wall they sealed off and unblocked the front door, but the streets were still crawling with the dead, so going out that way would just lead to the same fate. So how did they actually escape? Well, looking at the hole in the drywall once again, we see dried blood around the edges. It's entirely possible this individual was injured by smashing through, but it's not really that hard to punch or kick through a wall. Angry teenagers do it all the time. So instead, I propose our survivalist here had the same train of thought as Rick Grimes in Season 1, Episode 2. The dead are able to tell the difference between the living somehow. Maybe it's by the smell. So covering themselves with a bedsheet or blanket as a poncho, they would use the blood and guts from the unburned pile of bodies as a camouflage, laying it on thick as they passed through the hole. Opening the door, our survivor would keep their head down and walk the streets among the dead, shuffling slowly until reaching safety. They had wished to remain distant in their community when it stood, but maybe, if they embraced the safety in numbers philosophy, they wouldn't be forced to abandon it instead. In time, the herd would clear out of the neighborhood, aimlessly moving on to its next victims, but those who fell to the dead within their homes would remain still, awaiting their next meal as Wiltshire Estates rots away with them. Now, I understand what happened here may seem inconsequential. After all, it's just a set piece to have a cool moment with walkers. But it's these kinds of small unexplored scenes that really expand on the horror and despair of this world. As mentioned at the beginning, this whole scene is an adaptation / reference to the Wiltshire attack in the comics, where our survivors wander into what seems like an unoccupied neighborhood just to be ambushed by the dead hiding in the shadows. But this version of the story is very different, as the novels revealed the governor had visited this place in the early days and put up a warning sign as seen in the main comics, very similar to the Don't Open Dead Inside Door scene in episode 1. It's clear they didn't include that sign in this scene for that very reason, but they showed signs of somebody escaping in other ways, as we've discussed today. But regardless, I don't think the governor was involved in the TV version of the story, as he describes starting the outbreak in an apartment building, and nothing we see here lines up with anything we've been told about his backstory. Where did this individual end up? Well, that is a question I don't have an answer for. But knowing the wasteland, it's more than likely they met their end down the road regardless. Even if these scenes don't really need to have a full explanation, I think these kinds of videos are fun thought experiments for myself and the community. So please let me know if you agree or disagree with my theory, and if you don't, I'd love to hear why. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. Thanks so much for watching.